There are some things we just don't know. Often we don't know them because of the complexity of the items and systems involved. Did you know, for example, that scientists, even computers, cannot tally the absolute number of arrangements a system can make consisting of merely 20 molecules? Just 20 molecules leaves us not knowing. It's estimated that the human brain contains 50 to 100 billion neurons. We can only roughly estimate the amount. Don't even ask how many molecules constitute these amounts. I'd wager it's not closely estimable. Of these 50 to 100 billion neurons, 10 billion of them are cortical pyramidal cells. You know, the cells mostly associated with the cerebral cortex. Cortical pyramidal cells pass signals to one another through approximately 1,000 trillion synaptic connections. 1,000 trillion. Try getting your mind around that number. But it's not simply the astonishing number of molecules, neurons, and synaptic connections that make our current understanding of the human brain primitive. It's mostly the aggregation of these elements into complex systems, their volume and nature, and how they operate that is staggering and dumbfounding. Now, considering this physical complexity alone, much less the psychological, sociological, and environmental factors involved, it's remarkable that people can think that they know if human beings have free will or not. Upon reflection, it's remarkable that I once thought that. It was arrogant of me, and it's arrogant of some others, to think that they can give a definitive answer to the broad question, do human beings have free will or are they determined? I don't buy any answer to the broad question other than, I don't know. There are other things I don't buy that arise in the free will versus determinism debate. I don't buy this idea that either quantum or Newtonian mechanics has much to say about whether or not whether or not the will is free or if it's determined. I'm so cynical about this that I'm not even convinced that quantum or Newtonian mechanics has anything important to contribute to the discussion whatsoever. Perhaps, at best, it warrants an incidental footnote that one without a significant loss of understanding could safely ignore. My reasons for thinking this will be apparent when I discuss emergent properties later on. Those under the sway of quantum mechanics essentially seem to argue, because the movement of subatomic particles is indeterminate, and the human brain is comprised of subatomic particles, the brain event of willing must be indeterminate. Those who make some version of this argument tend to accept the existence of some form of free will. Those still nursing the hope for the ultimate vindication of Newtonian mechanics essentially seem to argue, because the movement of elementary particles is determinate and deterministic, or at least in principle determinate and deterministic, and the human brain is comprised of elementary particles, the brain event of willing must be determinate and deterministic. Those who make some version of this argument tend to be some version of a determinist about the will. I believe the proponents of both these positions commit the same fallacy, the fallacy of composition. The fallacy of composition proceeds on the mistaken notion that what is true of the parts must be true of the whole. Suppose someone were to argue, because atoms are invisible to the naked eye, objects comprised of atoms are naked to the physical eye. We would, of course, think that is preposterous, since every physical object is comprised of atoms, and we can see many physical objects. Yet many people seem to think that they have logical carte blanche to generalize from the behavior of the smallest constituents of matter to the comparatively macroscopic event of a wholly different kind, the psychological event of making a choice. They can write essays and books about it and engage in endless raging debates about it on YouTube. Yet all of it proceeds on an informal logical fallacy that is explained in every elementary critical thinking course. More interesting than the making of the fallacy itself are the possible sources for the impetus to make the fallacy. For brevity's sake, let's stipulate that there are probably many reasons why people feel impelled to commit the fallacy of composition in staking out claims in the free will and determinism debate. But I can't help but note that those who do commit this fallacy in the debate seem to proceed on the assumption that the resolution of the question about free will and determinism must be grounded in a single explanatory source that is ontologically fundamental. Interesting, isn't it? How we no longer look to God as a single explanatory source that must be ontologically fundamental. Instead, we now look to atomic and subatomic particles to play the explanatory and ontological role that God once held. We have kept the form of the assumption and merely switched the referent. Atheistic in substance, theistic in form. This brings up another claim I don't buy made by some on the hard determinist side of the debate. I don't buy this notion that any resolution of the free will and determinist issue will necessarily be made at the level of the behavior of the smallest and most indivisible entities involved in the psychological event of willing. That doesn't follow logically, as I hope I've just shown, and it doesn't accord with the behavior of some physical systems which generate emergent properties. I want to stress the physical aspect of emergent properties because too many hard determinists pigeonhole and caricature those who argue that free will could very well be an emergent property of complex physical systems. Those who proffer the possibility that free will might be an emergent property are not trying to reintroduce some kind of magical or spiritual explanation in the discussion. They are simply pointing out correctly that the physical world is rife with emergent properties, and there is no reason to exclude the explanatory sufficiency of such a model from the free will and determinism debate. That is, they are saying that the physical world holds many systems where a property emerges not as the result of any property of the components of the system, but as the result of the system as a whole. Here are some examples of emergent properties: surface tension, viscosity, elasticity, tensile strength, even the complex symmetrical patterns of snowflakes. Color is another example because elementary particles do not absorb or emit specific wavelengths of light. Consequently, they have no color. But when these particles are arranged into atoms, they absorb or emit specific wavelengths of light. Only then can they be said to have color. Organic molecules are an emergent property of inorganic particles. So to those who argue that the psychological event of making a choice that is in some meaningful sense of the term free is an emergent property of the complex systems involved in brain's physiology and activity are not. Again, they are not introducing anything phantasmagorical into the debate. They are simply analogizing from the instances of emergent properties in the physical world. And as far as any of us know, in the end, these people could be correct about free will and determinism. Thank you.